Hello and welcome to CNBC-TV18 News. I'm Arundhati Ramnan and here are the headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. Profit booking on the Lal Street as Nifty drops 1% from its high point of the day. Bank stocks bucked the trend with Nifty Bank Index closing at record highs. The rupee gains ground against the dollar, hitting its highest level in 5 weeks. Cryptocurrencies see a rapid sell-off. Bitcoin briefly drops to its lowest level in 2022. Investor sentiment takes a beating after the world's largest crypto exchange, Binance, steps in to bail out the second largest exchange, FTX, due to a liquidity crunch. Tata Motors reports a 944 crore rupee loss in the second quarter, even as revenue rises 30% year-on-year. Margins also miss estimates. Facebook's parent company Meta sacks 11,000 employees in one of the biggest layoffs so far this year. This is also the first layoff in the company's 18-year history. Mark Zuckerberg takes the onus, says his optimism led to overstaffing. No red wave in the U.S. midterm elections as Democrats perform better than expected. The race to control the Senate and the House remains too close to call. This is a setback for former President Donald Trump, who was the face of the Republican campaign. CNBC-TV18 Newsbreak confirmed the union government releases framework for its sovereign green bond, provides for flexibility for unutilized funds to be rolled over for 2 consecutive years. Proceeds raised from the sale of bonds would be used to eligible green projects that fall under renewable energy, clean transportation, among others. The government will release a reworked draft data protection bill for feedback after withdrawing it from the parliament in August. The draft bill is likely to keep social media companies outside the regulatory ambit after concerns over overlapping regulations. Data localization norms may be relaxed as well. Setback for Nirav Modi as UK High Court orders his extradition to India to face charges of bank fraud. Nirav Modi can appeal before higher courts. Elon Musk discloses yet another share sale in Tesla worth $4 billion. Musk has sold Tesla shares worth $20 billion since April, when he first made an investment in Twitter. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud takes oath as India's 50th Chief Justice. President Draupadi Murmu administers the oath of office. Justice Chandrachud promises to make a no-stress court for everyone. As the countdown to Himachal Pradesh elections begins, CNBC-TV18 gets you a ground report that puts the spotlight on the state's acute water crisis. Those were the headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. Straight to the market action of the day. Profit booking on the Lal Street saw the Sensex and Nifty drop 1% from the high point of the day. In the end, Sensex lost over 150 points and Nifty dropped nearly 50 points. But bank stocks bucked the trend with the Nifty Bank Index ending at a record closing high. So some green on the screen there. In the money market, the Indian rupee ended at a 5-week high against the dollar. This on the back of higher FPI inflows and global dollar weakness. $1 now costs just over 81 rupees. To the top international story of the day, counting in the U.S. midterm elections is currently underway, and the Democrats are surpassing expectations with a solid performance. Now, the race for the House and Senate remained too close to call. Many polls had pointed to a red wave, with Republicans sweeping the midterm, but that has not materialized. However, Republicans could be taking control of the House of Representatives. The Democrats could keep control of the Senate by a wafer-thin margin. Now, let's start with the big results from Pennsylvania. Democrat John Fetterman defeated Republican Mehmet Oz to flip the Senate seat. This is a big win for Democrats, which bolsters their chance of controlling the Senate. Democrats in California, Hawaii, Illinois, and Vermont are expected to win their Senate seats by the large margin. However, Washington and Colorado remain too close to call. Critical states like Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada are also too close to call, but several polls suggest that the Democrats are leading the race marginally. But all of this is not lost for the Republicans, who can wrest control of the House of Representatives. This will deal a blow to President Biden's legislative agenda, but the Democrats can offset some of this damage by maintaining control of the Senate. Now, this year, the midterms have also thrown up some key milestones. Maryland has elected its first black governor, with Democratic candidate Wes Moore winning the elections. Massachusetts has elected its first openly lesbian governor. Democrat Maura Healey made history by winning that race. And Bree Jackson reports on the midterms and its significance for former President Donald Trump. Take a look.
some of the Trump-backed candidates that President or former President Trump thought or was pushing for, they did not win. In particular, when you talk about that race there, that Senate race in Pennsylvania, where former President Trump had backed Dr. Oz, but John Fetterman, the Democrat, did win that race. And President Biden was watching these results as they rolled in, and top advisors say he was in the upbeat mood. But overall, even though we don't know exactly what will happen, top Democrats say that it was an unexpectedly good night, in particular when it comes to that race there in Pennsylvania, which was a key seat. Fetterman is now going to replace retiring GOP Senator Pat Toomey. Some of the other big races that we did see where Republicans did pick up a win, or at least maintain a seat there in the Senate, where J.D. Vance was able to win in Ohio. But Democrats did stave off that red wave that many people had predicted, outperforming during the election cycle, where historically the party in favor does not typically do well. So with the votes still being counted, the Republicans do believe that they will secure enough seats to take over the House. But the Senate still remains in the balance, in particular when you think about that race in Georgia, which has been too close to call.
And you can catch the full coverage of the U.S. midterm elections live from Washington and Wall Street at 7 p.m. right here on CNBC-TV18. It is a setback for diamond merchant Nirav Modi in the Punjab National Bank scam. He has lost the appeal against his extradition to India on mental health grounds. Sanjay Suri is here with more. Sanjay?
So a big win for the Indian government here. Nirav Modi's appeal against extradition has been dismissed at the appeals court here in London. He was allowed to appeal on the sole grounds of mental health, that extradition to India would damage his mental health, that he has a history of such problems, and that there is a serious risk of suicide. The court ruled that all his references to suicide have been vague and that he has not actually ever attempted suicide, and so this argument was dismissed. But before we get too excited that we will see Nirav Modi in India shortly, we do need to be aware that there is a parallel case that could trip up this whole process of extradition and make the victory pointless, as it did in the case of Vijay Mallya. Nirav Modi too is reported to have applied for political asylum. If that process were to continue, or if his appeal there were to succeed, then the extradition order here would be meaningless. There is, on the other side, on the optimistic side, we can hope that there is a possibility that his asylum appeal has been heard and dismissed. We do not know one way or another, because that is a confidential process. But if that appeal has been dismissed, it could be just weeks before Nirav Modi is back in India. On the extradition track, he still has possibility of going to the European Court of Human Rights. That is not likely to admit his appeal, and if that is dismissed, he could gain a very short period of time, only a few weeks, and after that the Home Office could then rule for his physical extradition, and we could be looking at seeing Nirav Modi back in India within weeks, unless that is tripped up by his asylum appeal.
Right, Sanjay, thank you so much for bringing us those details. Now, Facebook's parent company Meta has announced the biggest tech layoff so far this year. The company has sacked 11,000 employees, which amounts to about 13% of its workforce. Shilpa Ranipeta is here with all of those details. Shilpa?
Well, this is the first time since Mark Zuckerberg founded the company that he has had to lay off in what is currently the largest layoffs we've seen this year. Now, nearly 13% of Meta is being let go. That amounts to more than 11,000 employees. Now, this is across Meta's family of apps, including Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, among others. Now, in a message to employees, Zuckerberg said that he thought that the move to online and the e-commerce surge that we saw during the pandemic will continue post the pandemic as well. And significantly, he increased investments in that direction. But that did not play out as he expected. Online commerce returned to prior trends, and the macroeconomic downturn, increased competition did cause the revenue to be much lower than he expected. Zuckerberg says that the company now needs to become more capital efficient. Laid-off employees will now lose access to most Meta systems today, but will have access to their email, to which he said to send farewell messages. Now, employees in the US will get 16 13 weeks of base pay with 2 additional weeks for every year they've worked as severance. RSU vesting will also be given, and also health insurance will be covered for the next 6 months. Now, along with career services and immigration support as well for those who are on a visa. Now, he said that the support will be similar outside of the US as well. Now, in addition to layoffs, Meta will also cut discretionary spending and extend its freezing on hiring through the first quarter. Zuckerberg is also shifting focus to high priority growth areas like AI discovery engine, ads, business platforms, and the long-term vision that they have for the metaverse. Cost-cutting measures also include scaling back of budgets, reducing perks, shrinking Meta's real estate footprint. Back to you.
Right, Shilpa. So mega layoffs there at Meta. Thank you so much for those details. Now, the government will release a reworked draft data protection bill for feedback after withdrawing it from the parliament in August. Now, the draft bill is likely to keep social media companies outside the regulatory ambit. Ashmit Kumar is here with more details. Ashmit?
Well, it's been a long time coming. You pointed out 2017 is when we had the Puttaswamy judgment, which upheld the right to privacy. Since then, we've seen back and forth, with the latest being that the centre had withdrawn the bill from the parliament on account of what they had called were excessive amendments, and a complicated regime is what the centre had called it, and had withdrawn it. What we understand is that they've paid heed to some of the advice that they received from some of the intermediaries, some of the stakeholders. So as far as what the deadline looks like, well, at least it will be open up for public consultation by the end of November or by early December. That's the indication that sources within the government are telling us. As to what the changes could look like, well, the broader theme that the government is trying to convey is that, look, we're looking for a simple regime. We're looking for ease and compliance. We're looking for a regime that is not averse to startups, that is supportive of startups. As to what exactly those changes are, well, there are a couple of takeaways here important to keep in mind. There was a lot of feedback received on account of data localization, storage, and processing norms. These are conditions which one understands that are likely to be relaxed. That's what sources within the government are telling us. That's one. The other important takeaway is social media companies, intermediaries. The earlier regime, the bill that was before the parliament, had sought for overriding powers being given to the Data Protection Authority that it would exercise over these intermediaries. What we understand is that these social media companies, given that they're already regulated under the IT Act, are likely to be taken out of the regulatory ambit of the data protection bill. So that's the second key takeaway. The third is this bill was found to be excessive. Data protection bill was found to be excessive as it went even as far as to specify conditions for hardware and for devices. That is again something that in fact received a lot of lashback from the stakeholders, from the industry, and that is something that the government sources tell us is something that the bill will be aware of, will be wary of, and will keep these devices and regulating them out of the ambit of the data protection bills. But clearly all eyes now on the government, on MeitY, for releasing it for public consultation, and that's when we can begin to get more clarity on the timeline going forward.
Right, Ashmit. Many thanks for those details. Now, CNBC-TV18 Newsbreak confirmed the union government releases its framework for its sovereign green bond, provides for flexibility for unutilized funds to be rolled over for 2 consecutive years. Sapna Das joins us now with all of those details. Sapna, take us through the key contours of this.
Well, the government has tried to bring out a comprehensive framework on the issuance of sovereign green bonds. And it's a small start that they're making, but an important start also in terms of the kind of borrowing that they are aiming for in the current financial year via green bonds. It's quite modest, around $2 billion odd, around 16,000 crores is the number. So first off, they have tried to define the eligible categories which will attract this kind of green financing. And those eligible categories for those green projects would be renewable energy, clean transportation, sustainable water and waste management, pollution control, green buildings. These are the broad eligible categories where this kind of financing can be invited. That's one. Second, the government is also trying to give some flexibility to the framework, on 2 aspects. One, of course, money raised, suppose in a particular financial year, it can still be utilized for green financing over the next 2 financial years. So it's not necessarily the money has to be plowed in immediately, because the identification and evaluation of such green projects will take its own due time. And I think the government has kept that in mind. They have also kept the interest of potential investors in mind. Second, relating to this, if the money remains unutilized in the current financial year, this can still be rolled over for utilization in the consecutive years. So as I said, it's a small beginning on part of the government. Just around $2 billion odd is what they are targeting for this year. So we'll have to wait and watch for those tranches and those issuances as and how the GOI and RBI are ready for that. there will be some action on that front. But it's a beginning that has been made by the government, and this should be noted by potential investors.
All right, Sapna, thank you so much for those details. Now, on that note, it is time for us to head into a short break. Coming up next, we count down to Himachal Pradesh elections. A special report on the acute water crisis in the state is coming up. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Representatives from 198 countries are in a huddle in Egypt, hoping to strike a deal to reduce the harmful effects of climate change. At the COP27 summit, climate compensation and financing are taking center stage. Radhika Udas and I delve deep into a new report on carbon emissions, which shows developed nations who have historically contributed to higher emissions are simply not paying their fair share. Take a look.
We are on a highway to climate hell, with our foot still on the accelerator.
For the first time in 28 years, funding for loss and damage caused by climate disasters is included on the agenda at the annual climate summit. India has been among the developing nations pushing for this over the last many years. Union Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav made a pitch for a proper definition of climate finance and asked rich nations to step up and contribute their fair share. Speaking at COP27, Bhupendra Yadav said, and I quote, "Climate finance is still a mirage, and effective climate adaptation such as early warnings for all helps us collectively in our region toward reducing vulnerabilities and ensuring preparedness and swift and timely response to natural hazards." End of quote. Wealthy nations promised to contribute $100 billion by 2020. 2 years on, they are far, far away from meeting this target. What's worse, an analysis by Carbon Brief shows they are not even contributing a fair share equivalent to their emissions. Take the United States, which should be contributing $39 billion, which is equivalent to its carbon emission. But the report shows US provided a mere $7.6 billion in 2020. This is less than 1/5 of the fair share US should be contributing to climate financing.
What the analysis that we have just completed at Carbon Brief shows is that they have not only failed to meet that target, but the contributions that several countries have made are far out of step with their historical responsibility for climate change. So the US, which is responsible for 1/5 of all CO2 emissions that have been released, they have only contributed $8 billion in 2020, which may sound like a lot, but it's 32 billion short of what they should be committing.
The US is not alone. Many rich nations are not paying their fair share for climate financing. Canada is contributing only 37% of its fair share, Australia is at 38%, and the UK is paying 76% of its fair share in comparison to its emissions. Countries like Germany, Japan, and France are the exceptions. They have been paying more than their fair share, but there is a catch. These nations are providing loans and not grants.
The COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine has led to a rise in energy costs across the world. Green energy transition has temporarily taken a back seat. But the threat of climate change is only getting worse, and the call for equitable climate financing is only getting louder. In Mumbai, Radhika Udas.
Shifting focus to Himachal Pradesh, Prime Minister Narendra Modi campaigned in the state today ahead of the assembly election scheduled on the 12th of November. Addressing a rally in Kangra today, the Prime Minister said that Himachal Pradesh needs a stable and strong government of double engine and linked the Congress with instability, corruption and scam. Now, Kangra district has the most number of assembly seats. Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge also spoke at a rally in Shimla, along with Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel. Kharge accused the BJP of fooling the people with false promises. Now, for a lot of people in the state, many of the conveniences of the 21st century have still not arrived, like easy and ready availability of water, especially drinking water. The situation reached tipping point earlier this year with people in Theog area of Himachal staging multiple protests demanding water supply. CNBC-TV18 Santya Gora reports even the promises of water during the ongoing election campaigning does not hold much water. Take a look.
50-year-old Saraswati Devi Sharma has lived in Karyal village in Himachal's Theog region for 31 years, and every day she has had to walk over 5 kilometers over hilly terrain to get water, not just for her family to drink, but for everyday use. 15 years ago, the state government installed taps and said Karyal now had water connectivity, but there's no water in these taps.
बहुत दूर से लाना पड़ता था बेटा। पहला तो मिल भी जाता था दूर से ढोने को, अब कहीं से मिलता नहीं। जब से लेकर ये सड़कें लगी कहीं, अब तो दूर पार जाना पड़ता नाले से। अगर सुबह जाएंगे तो शाम को वापसी होती है। ऐसी समस्या है पानी की, बहुत ही कठिनाई है, क्या करें।
1 kilometer away from Karyal is Bekhalti town. People in this region staged multiple protests this year demanding water supply, but the protests have not borne fruit.
हमारे यहाँ पानी आता है 13-14 दिन बाद। आज हमारे यहाँ 14 दिन बाद पानी नहीं आया, 14 दिन हो चुके, पानी अभी तक नहीं आया है। अब आप खुद ही कह सकते हैं कि 13 दिन बाद अगर पानी नहीं आया तो क्या कर सकते हैं।
13 दिन के बाद पानी आ रहा है। पानी हम टैंकर से खरीद के कर रहे हैं। एक टैंकर का जो कॉस्ट होती है वो अराउंड, अगर 2000 लीटर हम पानी लेते हैं तो वो 800 to 1000 रुपीज़ वेरी करती है, डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द डिस्टेंस फ्रॉम वेयर इट इज़ कमिंग। और दूसरी चीज़ जो होती है, अगर आप बड़ा टैंकर उतारेंगे तो वो वेरी करता है 3000 से 4000 के बीच में। और मैं अगर पर्सनल बात करूँ तो मैंने जो अभी तक पानी खरीद लिया है उसका अमाउंट अभी लैक्स में चला गया है, जो भी मैंने अभी तक लिया हुआ है 3-4 सालों के अंदर।
जो हमारे शहरी विकास मंत्री थे उन्होंने उस पानी को बंद कर दिया जी, ये इनको नहीं मिल सकता। उनका कहने का मतलब ये है कि यहाँ पे जो गांव वाले लोग हैं वो तो पानी नहीं लेंगे। अधिकार हमारा आता है सबसे पहले, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन राइट मिलता है हमें। जो लोकल क्षेत्र होता है पहले उनका अधिकार आता है प्राकृतिक संसाधन पे, और वो कहते हैं कि जो पानी है वो शहर वालों का है। अब आप मुझे खुद बताए कि पानी सिर्फ शहर वाले पीते हैं, गाँव वाले नहीं पीते।
Adding insult to injury is the fact that Thiog has seen the installation of water tanks under government schemes like Giri Water Scheme, but the water under this scheme goes to the cities and not to the households in the surrounding rural region.
Himachalis somehow sail through summers, but when snow blocks roads for days and even water tankers can't reach these hilly areas, people of these areas are left without water for days. People have no other option but to store snow, melt it, boil it and then use it. Himachalis continue to struggle for their basic need, but the state government thinks that this problem is not that serious.
2018 की अगर बात कहें, पानी का संकट थोड़े वक्त के लिए आया, एक हफ्ते के लिए आया था, लेकिन ऐसा भी नहीं था कि पानी था ही नहीं।
But government data says otherwise. Records with the Jal Shakti Vibhag of the Himachal Pradesh government show that till December 2021, the state government provided households with 40 liters of water per capita per day, much lower than the requirement of 70 liters of water per capita per day. In a recent report to Asian Development Bank, the state has also admitted that most of the water pipes are in extremely poor condition with leakage. Even in the urban areas, the state administration has accepted that there's at least 25% of water wastage due to leakage. The situation is turning dire, especially with winter approaching once again. But the feeling is one of frustration, with various state governments not having done enough to solve the problems on the ground. Installing taps and hand pumps only add up on paper, and there's not much hope that the next government will do much better.
पानी की समस्या आप गांव में जाके देखिए, नल बिल्कुल लगे हुए हैं, जल कोई नहीं है। अब इसमें ऐसा है, मैंने पहले भी बोला, जिसकी चलती है उसकी क्या गलती है। गरीब तो वहाँ का वहाँ है, बाकी इससे मैं ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं बोलूँगा।
In Thiog, Himachal Pradesh, Santya Gora for CNBC-TV18.
With that, it is a wrap on this edition of News Now. More news continues on the other side. Stay tuned.